So thank you for coming. So yeah, I'm just gonna dive in. So first of all, why am I giving this talk? Well, as the presenter just alluded to, there is definitely a movement in workers in the games industry who are advocating for better work conditions in order to be able to have a sustainable work-life balance. Burnout rates are really high, and workers are leaving the industry in great numbers. So those of us that work in so-called peripheral domains of game dev, most famously the voice actors from SAG-AFTRA and their strike, but also as community managers, we find ourselves facing unique hurdles from a very frequent failure to be actually recognized as part as game dev, but also there's a lot of lack of job stability, especially in independent game dev, where part-time and temporary contracts for us are kind of the norm. So the purpose of my talk is twofold. First, I hope to bring awareness to the difficult balancing act that is being a community manager, in order to gather support from people who might hire us and not necessarily be aware of the conditions. But also I want to empower community managers to start speaking up about this, to open the conversation, to share our tactics and our experiences. So I will mostly be addressing the you community manager in my talk. But first of all, I have to give credit where credit is due. I need to acknowledge that my current work conditions have really enabled me to focus so much on those factors that I can control in my work-life balance. So I want to just quickly describe my work conditions, and hopefully this might inspire those of you who are hiring community managers. So I am a community manager and QA tester at a small studio of 6 called Clever Endeavour Games. We're based in Montreal. We make a game called Ultimate Chicken Horse, which I always love to explain, but for the purposes of this talk, just know that it's a party multiplayer game. It has online multiplayer, and it is on Steam, Xbox, PS4, and very recently on the Switch, and it has user-generated content, hence the need for community management. So some characteristics of my work conditions. First of all, I have the luxury of working full-time and on-site with Clever Endeavour. Quick aside, as a small company, how do you afford having a full-time employee in community management? For Clever Endeavour, it was a decision of going from a team of 5 to a team of 6. Well, in my case, it just so happens that I have a mixed role. I do community management and QA in equal parts. I will not get into that, but if it's something you want to talk to me about, please do. But yeah, so I work full-time on-site, so instead of relying on a handful of part-time contracts, I actually have the stability of a permanent full-time position. And some things come of that. So because I work on site, I actually share the same work hours as the rest of my colleagues, which means that I don't need to rely on my own self-discipline to work regular hours and not do overtime. And also because I don't have any other project that I work on. I don't have scheduling conflicts that arise between different projects. I don't have weird additive peaks in work, in amounts of work. So my focus is really completely on what I do with Clever Endeavour. Now, also the work culture is a big factor. And at Clever Endeavour, basically the idea is that life happens. The work culture is very strongly oriented towards being as flexible as possible to accommodate all sorts of life events, be they bad or good. personal days really are counted only if there is some sort of blatant abuse, which I've never seen. And important note, every day at a business conference is counted as a work day. So this is not on my time. And there is also a very, very strong tendency to go against crunch, be it scheduled or unscheduled. Everything over time is not welcome. So one way that we make that happen is that we don't announce any release dates or important milestones before we are 100% sure that they are happening. So that avoids, looming deadlines and time pressure on the team, and also makes it so that I don't have to do backpedaling on social media and try to mitigate situations, which makes my job a lot easier. And the co-founders model the same work hours as they expect from their employees. So they come in at 10 and they leave at 5:30, and that is very important. Finally, there's also a team mentality. So as I said, it was a small studio. And everyone in the team is part of the game development process. I get to assist to every meeting about the game and the development, which means that I'm always absolutely on top of things, and I can communicate that with the community. I'm also valued as a person in the studio who can have opinions about things other than just community management or QA, but at the same time, each of us is really honored and valued as the expert that they are. So the end result is that I feel recognized and I feel empowered, and that is really important. But yeah, so the part of the talk title that I did not have space for at the start is I can be my worst enemy. And I really want to focus on those things that I can control in my work-life balance, with the knowledge in mind that I've been able to focus on this because I have good work conditions. So I'm going to go over these different things, but I just want to give a disclaimer. I do not have all of this figured out. So I launched the game on Switch on September 25th. I was at another conference last weekend. I have 2 more events coming this month, and I've been doing overtime to make all of that happen, and that's not sustainable. But I have had the luxury of being able to be mindful of my many bad habits and my slip-ups, and to work on them since I work at Endeavour. So the first thing that is in my control is defeating imposter syndrome. And I think that's a really important thing. So imposter syndrome is pretty rampant in the industry in general, I believe. But for community managers, it stems from very specific sources. So why do we feel like imposters? Well, often specializing in community management doesn't come from academia or any sort of formal apprenticeship, but rather by engaging in communities on a volunteer basis, being part of passion projects. So a lot of the skills that community managers have been learned by moderating or administrating forums and chat servers and Discord channels, Twitch channels, Facebook groups, subreddits, you name it. And making the mentality switch from this is my hobby to this is my specialty is really not an easy task, especially when you have to fight to get it recognized. And one thing is that it might require you to change the way that you spend your time at home. If what was your hobby is now a full-time job, that's true for any domain. It doesn't mean that you're any less passionate about it. It just means that you have made the decision to make this your career. On top of that, the tasks of community management are often referred to as soft skills. My good friend Osama has described soft skills as passive skills that apply area of effect bonuses to all party members around you. They stack infinitely, and you should develop your team members' soft skills, which is beautiful and true. But also it's really easy to see implicitly from this that soft skills are the kind of skill that everyone should learn, that everyone can learn, and that they are supplemental or bonus skills. But the truth is that community managers are specialists. We might be a support class, but we have gotten soft skills down to a science. So what I do to defeat imposter syndrome is what I just did. So I affirm it till I believe it. I make a point of noting for myself and others what I accomplish and the validity of what I do, even or especially when I'm feeling insecure about it. Also, there are more and more opportunities to take part in conferences and events to talk about community management. People want to hear about that expertise. So I really encourage every community manager to see those opportunities to be recognized as the expert that you are. And let me tell you, getting a positive response is a pretty good boost in self-confidence. I'm also blessed with teammates and mentors and peers and friends who will aggressively remind me that I am legitimate, without fault. And every time that I have sought reassurance and expressed that vulnerability, I've always had my concern greatly diminished rather than, increased. And for example, part of this reassurance coming from my friend Astrid, who is a goddess of community development, she was making a note that in the general realm of community management, workers that come from the video games industry are known to go above and beyond and to be top shelf picks. In fact, the extent of our involvement with communities, though it is often taken for granted in the video games industry, actually truly pushes the envelope. So, we got that out of the way. I'm not an imposter. Now comes the fun part of managing all of that social media. So, social media never sleeps, but you definitely should. And more than just sleeping, you really need time in your waking hours when you are not tied to your social media platforms. And argue that you need that every day of every week. So I have a plethora of tools and strategies to limit the grip that social media has on me. Hopefully sharing them can help those who are looking for those kinds of structures, but also illuminate just how much work goes into making community management work possible in the first place. So, at home, what I do is to maximize friction in the process of checking in on my social media. This helps prevent the fallacy of, oh, I'll just give this a quick look. Because it's never just a quick look. You're going to be sucked in for hours. And, my core tenet is basically that only emergencies truly matter when I'm at home. And even then, there are very few things that a community can do that will ruin the company overnight or even over the weekend. And even if something really bad happens, I'm actually not the sole bearer of, the responsibility of the company's image. The co-founders own that, literally and figuratively. So yes, keeping an eye out for abnormal social media activity on my personal hours is something that I do, but I'm not the only one who does it. And then there's the various strategies that I have. So first of all, I have a work browser that is dedicated for my work stuff. So I use Chrome. It's synced with my Chrome at work. But just basically the idea is that, for my personal stuff, I use Firefox. The browsers don't matter. The point is, it's a lot easier to just not open a browser than it is to selectively turn a blind eye to certain tabs and notifications. It's also very good to have a dedicated work phone. So I don't technically have the luxury of having a completely dedicated work phone. My phone has my personal phone number, though it is paid by the job. And it is understood that I use it as a personal device. But I make use of it very differently at work and at home, and I sort of automatize that. So the first thing I do is to use a folder to segregate all of my work apps. They all live in that small folder up there, and I don't have to see those apps if I don't open that folder. And for the other apps that are on my home screen, I don't actually have my work login on most of them. So the truth of the matter is that most of my work will not be done from my phone. So I really try to keep it that way. I also, so these are my work apps. I also automatically turn off notifications on every evening and weekend, so that when I'm home, I always keep my phone on Do Not Disturb, which, in my opinion, should be the default. And there's only a few exceptions, which are alarms, and then calls and text messages from contacts, so personal stuff. So in those hours, it automatically puts itself in a state where it will not beep or vibrate or light up for anything else than those very few things. So I will see other notifications only if I make the decision to pick up my phone. It's on my own terms. And also, as a rule, I don't give out my phone number for work stuff. I am quite reachable by so many other ways. So my phone number is for, friends, family, and people need to contact me in emergencies. Another thing is splitting your social media accounts. So very quickly, if you use social media to work, you will need to separate the professional and the personal. Just so that you don't see work-related stuff all the time. So for example, on Facebook, I only follow people, groups, and pages that are related to professional networking from my business account. But also, the odds are that you actually need to cull your personal social media. For example, on Facebook, I have started making a very liberal use of unfollowing and unliking and unfriending, because my personal account should be and is for family and friends, period. When it comes to Twitter, it's a little bit more difficult because having a role that is so strongly focused on having an online presence means that it's very hard for me to segregate the personal from the professional on Twitter because I need to be findable as a professional. But you can still fall back on filtering. So one method that I use is what I call courtesy acts. So for example, I will give someone a follow to cement or to maintain a connection, a work relationship. But I don't necessarily need to add all of their stuff to my timeline. I can mute them, or I can make smart use of lists, which I will get more into later. So that's what I do at home. At work, where I do need to be paying attention to social media, I reduce the friction of going through the ceaseless grind that social media can be. So I make use of some browser tabs. Actually, every time I open Chrome, I have a set of home tabs that will open. And some of them are just tabs that will check in at the start of the day and then close. But others I will keep around for most of the day. But these tabs contain everything that I need to get started with my day, to pick up where I left off, and make sure that I am not overwhelmed by whatever I might have left behind. So one of those browser tabs that I have is Habitica, which is a gamified platform for all sorts of habits. The way I use it for work is I use the daily tasks column to make a checklist of the things I need to look at. So I'm going to do a first round in the morning, process emails, checking on Instagram, all that jazz. And then I'll check that off. And depending on the day's priorities, I will go more or less in depth in each of these. I usually come back to Habitica for a second daily round, mostly for emails, Twitter, and Discord. And if I have time, I also check off some habits. So in my case, the habits are recurring tasks that are not on a schedule or don't have deadlines, that I don't need to do daily, but I still need to do regularly. And really here, the general idea is to avoid this sort of endless social media Skinner box loop of going from one platform to the other endlessly. I also use TweetDeck quite a lot. So TweetDeck is a third-party tool for visualizing your Twitter feed. And I rely very heavily on it. Good things about TweetDeck is that you can easily turn off retweets. You don't see other people's likes. And everything just naturally appears in the reverse chronological order. Basically, it makes Twitter usable. And you can have multiple different feeds on the same screen. This looks very busy. You do get used to it, but also this is particularly bad because I have been tracking mentions of the game and then mentions of the game in the phonetic Japanese way of writing it, because we just launched on Switch and the Japanese players are talking a lot. But in any case, the kinds of feeds that you can have on TweetDeck. So I have all direct messages on Twitter. I have a feed to see the posts of this company's account, or you can follow other users if you want. You can also have a feed for your scheduled posts if you use TweetDeck to schedule. You can have feeds for search terms. You can do complex searches, so you can exclude certain terms. And you can also follow hashtags and lists. So if you're not aware, lists on Twitter, they can be public, but I always make them private. And they are just groups of users that you put together that you want to keep track of in a sort of theme. And depending on how busy things are and what my priorities are, I can look at certain columns and not others without being afraid that I might miss something that I wanted to see that day. So that's extremely valuable. And another browser tool that is wonderful is Notion.so. It's a project management tool that our team is using. We use it to create and assign our tasks in a shared database at the start of the week in a form of very loosely defined sprint. And then what we're assigned shows up in our individual pages in those drag and drop tables that we have set in events for everyone. So everyone has their tasks, their bugs, and their meetings. All of these items in the tables can contain information, either in the form of tags, which allows nice sorts like this to see just what you want to see. But there are also pages where you can put notes and links and attachments and all that you want. So they can be that tasks, basically documentation entirely. And any change that we make to these items on our page, because they are linked to the database, are propagated and kept for everyone. And then we have, on our personal page, we also have a zone which is basically free for all. It's up to us to organize how we want. And the point is that Notion is a flexible tool, and it does not have some of the time monitoring constraints from a lot of agile methods that very hardly apply to community management. So on my personal page, I have an area for notes for readings that I want to do at a later time. I have recurring tasks, which I made in the form of templates. So these are tasks that I do monthly or bi-monthly that I can just duplicate and then drag into my task table instead of having to rewrite them over and over. In the end, my sprint page is the #1 guide for me for what I'm going to be doing a certain day or over a week. I know at a glance what needs to be done, what is the relative priority of everything, what's coming up, what's on the back burner, and importantly, I can easily adapt. And as I said, I don't leave work on hold at the end of the day, and Notion allows me to do that because I know that all of my notes about what I've been doing are right there. All right, another tool at work is browser extensions. So at the top right corner of my Chrome tab, I have a handful of extensions that allow me to very quickly just check if something is, going on without having it be a very big distracting notification. It's a tiny thing in the corner. It's easy to ignore if I need to. And I keep it simple. It's my inbox, my RSS feed, my Instagram, my Facebook, and my LinkedIn. I also customize my app notifications. So we use Slack as a team for quick communications during the day. I personally keep the pop-up notifications with the text preview just to know at a glance if a conversation is relevant to me, because if I don't have the pop-up, I might be curious and go see anyway. And if I'm tagged in something that will be more visually pronounced, and I will go see it. Kind of the same thing on Discord. So except when I do my daily rounds, I only check in if I have been tagged in something. So these allow me to monitor my platforms in between my batch processing with very limited distraction, limited involvement, and it's a very centralized way of doing it. I think that it's important that I don't divide my attention, because I think that multitasking is a myth, so don't break the flow. And of course, community managers often make use, and really should make use, of drafting and scheduling tools for social media. Just so that you can have a presence on social media during times where you don't actually have to be there in person in real time. So I personally use Hootsuite. I use it to draft and schedule posts for Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at the same time. It helps cut down on copywriting work, and it really allows me to plan my entire publication calendar, if it applies, ahead of time in one batch. So that is everything social media. There's a lot of social media stuff in community management. But there are also other general rules that are important. And one of them, in my opinion, is to foster independent communities. So as weird as it may sound, as a community manager, it's actually in your best interest to grow communities that can do almost as well without you. It benefits you because you get a break. And it also makes the community stronger and more stable. So nurturing a community does not mean babying it. Of course, first of all, you want to have clearly stated community guidelines, somewhere that is easily accessible and somewhere that people will see as soon as they join the community. And those are a tool that you can always point to when someone is not following one of the guidelines, instead of having to repeat the same information over and over and over. But also, those guidelines that you have, you need to enforce them. So you can be a friendly figure in the community while being very firm on applying the guidelines. You don't want to have bad actors around who will cause trouble the second that you look away. You don't owe anyone the benefit of the doubt. You don't owe them a platform for free speech, because there are plenty of other places on the internet where they can voice what is often bad faith arguments. But all that being said, it is also super important to make note of the positive. You should really regularly highlight and reward desired behavior when it is exhibited by your community members, so that the regulars will make those into habits, and they will set the tone for interactions, whether you're there or not. So you basically empowered them to be guides for newcomers in the community, and also to take pride in contributing to a culture that they like. Also, you should make it easy for community members to help each other in very practical ways. So, for example, you can use Discord bots that can display answers to frequently asked questions, or give your support links with just a simple command that anyone in the Discord can use. Having an independent community also requires you to set boundaries. So, of course, this is a job for you, and you have to not be afraid to be very clear about that. For example, you definitely should have as a rule that you don't accept friend requests from anyone in the community. Also, you need to let people know what the etiquette should be on things like, giving you a ping on Discord, or sending you a direct message, or tagging you. All of the stuff that can distract you at times that you might not want to. And when they do, you should tell them when they should have prioritized other sources of information or other avenues for sharing. Very importantly, being friendly does not mean that you are everyone's friend or therapist, which sounds silly to say, but it's a necessity. That is something that you see very often as a community manager. So it's okay to turn people down. It's okay to enforce rules that some people might claim to have trouble following because, they say that they have some sort of social impairment that makes it difficult for them, or simply because they are kids and don't have the maturity to follow the rules. The point is that it's not your responsibility to fix those individuals, to help them mature, because you should not jeopardize the community for the sake of one person's social education. That is not your job. You can redirect those people to appropriate resources when needed, and just move on. And also, for your own sake, and it can be easy to fall for that, but you should really endeavor to separate the communities that you work for and what you consider to be your social circles, even if you might have come into those circles from a hobbyist or community member point of entry. Of course, you will be familiar with some of your most active community members, but really you should endeavor to keep that within the confines of work. And finally, it's very important as community managers to have support systems. It's dangerous to go alone. So you need support systems because you don't want to burn yourself out. And there is baggage that comes with community management. So make it a point to have those support systems. And in my opinion, as much as possible, your employer or your superior should be your #1 supporter. And that's by enabling and encouraging healthy time management and self-care practices. So if you're comfortable with it, I really urge you to discuss it with them, to let them know what your needs are, and if any adjustments might be needed. And I even go as far as disclosing my bad habits and discussing with my superiors how they can help keep me accountable for my sanity. For example, I have asked them in the past to nudge me to go home at a certain hour, or poke me if they see me logged into a work thing outside of work hours. I also make it a habit to snitch on myself if they don't catch me, because it forces me to be mindful of my bad patterns and to reflect critically on them. So, of course, maybe you're not, you don't have the luxury to have such supportive superiors, or you might just not be comfortable. Your colleagues can also be a very valuable source of support. They are part of the same work dynamics as you. They can support you in very tangible ways. But also, it's important to, in my opinion, have a network of peers that are in community management. So they know, they understand what you do and all that it entails, but they also have some distance from those dynamics that you have at work that you might be blind to. And sharing our experiences between community managers from different employment situations is our best way of knowing how the profession is faring and what's normal or abnormal in work conditions, and just generally what others have learned through experience, be it good or bad. You should also have support from other game dev people because their experience in their profession might be very different from yours, and it can be a great source of insight to see if someone's work conditions are significantly different from yours because they do a different job. You should also have people around you who have nothing to do with the job that you do, just because it's good to have some circles where you're not thinking about work. And also, community management is a lot of emotional labor. So you are carrying some psychological stress that might require you to have ritualistic or just regular self-care practices that requires professionals. So that can be therapy. It can also be resources from one of many organizations that specialize in mental health and video games, like Take This and Checkpoint and anxiety gaming. But also, you should have a safety net. You should have an emergency plan, because if something really goes wrong, you want to be able to access, a punctual therapy session. You want to be able to have, probably counseling. And again, I encourage you to talk about that to your employer so that they are aware that is the kind of thing that can arise. And if it's difficult for you to physically access these resources, there are websites like BetterHelp, where you can find counseling that is adapted for you. So, takeaways. First of all, employers need to empower their community managers to have healthy habits, and this starts with job stability. It's really easy to feel like an outsider or an imposter in, this great big game dev machine, but you are an essential and specialized workforce as much as everyone else. It's important that you disconnect completely from social media every weeknight, every weekend, and you do that by maximizing friction to access social media in the first place. Then on work time, you need structure to turn a continuous influx of information from so many sources into discrete chunks of focused work. You want to limit distractions as much as possible to maintain your flow. And it's in your best interest to empower your communities to be independent and basically self-managing to some extent. And that demands that you enforce boundaries. And again, I will reiterate that you need support structures because there is a lot of emotional labor and it can take a toll on you. So that is it. I will take questions if you have any. Thank you.
Yeah, so please raise your hand if you have any questions.
Hi, thank you. It was really helpful and much appreciated. So I have two questions. One is maybe very minimal or something, but the first one is you mentioned about the Slack previews, and I find that I have anxiety because in a lot of instances I have to share my screen, so I remove previews, but then I do end up sort of getting sucked into conversations, So I'm just wondering if you have any heuristic there. That's my first question.
So in general, I make very structured use of having multiple screens. So if you do screen sharing and you can share just one of your screens, and you can have your notifications pop up on the other one, that might be a solution.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And then I've recently started making use of Slack professional groups quite a bit, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about them in terms of organization or, I don't know, because there can be a lot of data to process on there.
Yeah. So the Slack group that I'm going to use as an example, which is a group of peers, is the Slack channel for Pixels Montreal. So they are an organization in games that empower women to make games and stay in games. And on their Slack channel, there is everything from event organization to calls for volunteers to help with certain things, but also sharing job postings and basically having a whisper channel for if there is a job posting that comes up, sometimes it will come with a note or a warning that there are certain conditions or people there that might not be safe. It's a great way to basically crowdsource that kind of information that you individually gather and might not broadcast because it might not be safe to do so. But yeah, you can help people avoid certain situations like that. And also there's just a lot of peer-to-peer help and support. We have a venting channel if we need it. We have a just generally positive channel. And a lot of direct networking happens there, so I've been introduced to people via that Slack channel. So yeah, I think it's very good for specialized or very specifically defined groups of people to get together and kind of be a common force together. I don't know if that. Anybody else?
Actually, I have a question for you. So
Please.
since in the gaming industry, community managers are very often recruited from within the actual gaming community you have for your specific game. So do you have any kind of advice you can share with newcomers who actually love the game they play and now they work for, and how to actually disconnect from that when going home? Because that's one of the biggest challenges, especially in this field.
Yeah, so that is very difficult. It requires discipline. It's why I have set up so many hurdles for me to engage with those communities when I'm at home. And it does help that because I have that dual role of being community manager and QA tester, I actually spend a bunch of time at work engaging with the game and with beta testers who give us feedback. And then I go into the game for work. So that does definitely help separate. It kind of removes the desire to play the game when I come home. And I think that in general, if community managers can be encouraged to engage with the product on their work hours, that's a very good way of helping them make that separation.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Then thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you for coming.